free time on the East Coast, just to kind of lay the groundwork of who everybody is by way of introduction. My name is Greg Wardis. I'm a security specialist here at Microsoft. I reside and work out of the Atlanta office, which is where the conference room on camera was. And I'm joined today by a partner by the name of Lightstream, and I will turn it over to Monty to kind of go through the introductions on his team.
Sure. Thanks, Greg. Monty Taylor. I'm a Microsoft Solution Advisor here at Lightstream. Quick rundown on my background is I am also former Microsoft, spent a couple of years as a technology strategist, basically working with customers like yourself and technical decision makers, strategy and consumption of Microsoft services. But I'll be leading and hosting, co-presenting with Greg and Rick today. We also have Jamie Diliberto and Ed Powers. Jamie?
Yeah, thanks, Monty. Yeah, my name is Jamie Diliberto. I am our Microsoft Alliance Manager here at Lightstream. And like Monty, I actually also came from Microsoft, spent about 2 years there in their Partner Solutions organization, and then came over to Lightstream about 1.5 years ago.
Perfect. I'm Ed Powers. I'm an enterprise cloud seller for Lightstream, kind of covering the entire nation, but I'm based out of Austin. Probably been dealing with Microsoft for a decade plus now, mostly on the partner side.
Perfect. Then the other person that was on camera earlier, Rick, if you could introduce yourself as well, and then we can get into the agenda.
Yeah, sure. Hi, guys. Rick Herrera. I'm the managing director, run sales for our large account South Enterprise, and I'm looking at some of the attendees here. I have customers on here, so excited. If you're familiar with some of my account manager names, Steve Jones works for me, Jonathan Bowles and Mal Wells. Those are a few that help manage some of the accounts that are in attendance today.
All right, perfect. So I will say that we've got a small enough group to where if you've got questions as we progress through the presentation, don't be bashful. Either, put up your virtual hand inside Teams or come off mute and have a conversation with us. This is your time, not ours, and we want to make it that way. So, you've got experts from both sides of the table on the phone, so please feel free to be vocal with your questions. I hate when people read slides, so I'm not going to do that, but just, the agenda is going to take us from a little bit of AI overview into data security. So we're talking about really two products today from a Microsoft perspective, Microsoft Purview and Microsoft Copilot for 365, overarching with kind of an AI context. So I will turn it over to Rick to go ahead and get things kicked off with some context.
Yeah, great. So as mentioned, I am the managing director for South. I'll be 25 years next month, so super excited about that. And so I've been around just watching Microsoft grow and drive tech innovation, and really the last 10 years with the cloud, right? We didn't expect the AI wave that we're seeing today. AI is not new, but Gen AI has really made a big impression on just a lot of companies. And so I think through that 25 years, what hasn't changed are the two most important assets of a company, and that's really the people and the data. And so with this new wave of AI, it's very interesting that we'll be able, both of those, people and data, will be able to benefit from all of the enhancements and just the innovation that's come out of that. And so when I say AI, it's for today, you're going to hear that's more around the Gen AI, right? AI is not new. Machine learning, a lot of that's been around, but since OpenAI came out through the breakthrough and Microsoft helped them with our investments being a partner there, that's really where a lot of companies are looking at this more aggressively for their people and for their business processes. When we think about just, if you haven't been digging into the AI piece, it really helps us access knowledge, create, edit content, get information served to us in ways that we hadn't seen before, right? And I think that's pretty key there. And we think about, well, why Microsoft? Well, we've developed, you're going to hear the word Copilot. When you hear the word Copilot, to us, Copilot equals AI. We really invested heavily in integrating all of those AI capability into all of our products, right? And Greg mentioned earlier that, yeah, we'll talk about Copilot today around the M365 piece, but we do have Copilots across our entire platform. And so as customers continue to adopt those technologies, they're going to get more value out of their current Microsoft investments, which is very, very key. The other thing is, well, why Microsoft? Well, with a lot of the AI that's been released, a lot of that is still available in the public. So we're helping customers think of their private implementations to ensure that it's your data, right? So we don't train your data. Your data is your data. And so we just want to make that delineation that all these great technologies get pointed to your data and you start to get the massive benefits from that, right? And I think an interesting thing is it's coming, whether we like it or not. My kids are in college and they're very proficient at it. So the new wave of information workers that are going to join the workforce, this is going to be common technology for them. And so companies need to be thinking about, how do I get control of it? How do I govern that? So Greg, can you move to the next slide? And so one question that I've gotten, and really over the last six to 8 weeks, I've had many conversations with CIOs around kind of their AI strategy. So there's two references that I'll leave this audience with. So one is an IDC study. It's business value of ebook. Both of these are on Microsoft.com web pages. And the second one is Microsoft AI strategy roadmap. They're pretty quick reads, but it helps organizations think about structure. And so when we think about steps, I'm not going to exhaust this slide, but I do just want to call out two specific ones that are important for our conversation today. Well, so establish an AI council. That's a very common question I ask. And so every customer is at a varying journey of this. We've presented to AI councils, helping them enable and understand our capabilities. And I'm sure they allow other AI providers to do the same, but do you have an AI council, right? And it shouldn't just be IT, it should be the CIO with their business partners. It could comprise of operations, sales, HR, just finance, just different groups. And they come together to start thinking about their business. How can AI truly help their business, right? And over time, they start to really identify use cases that would yield an ROI and start to work out a process. So I think having that steering committee is a vital step to drive top-down adoption. And then the second piece, which is a no-brainer, is responsible AI, governance, security, things like that. A lot of customers, legals, departments always ask questions. There's always a worry that data is going to leak. And so just making sure that all of these components are tight, right? And there'll be discussion today specifically on these topics. But if you get past these first two and start to really understand the capabilities and the art of the possible, then you can definitely look at partners like Lightstream to start taking business use cases and make it real. And I think we've got a lot of great partners in Lightstream that we're showcasing today is helping other customers think about adoption, but also help them think about processes like this. So with that, looking forward to engaging with some of you guys down in the future, but I'd love to pass it off to Greg. Greg, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Rick. So I've got 3 slides. They're all looking at trends that really kind of delve into AI as a technology, but really technology as a whole. And it's funny when Rick talks about his son or his kids being in college and being proficient with this technology. I'm sitting here on my laptop connected to however many people are in the room, talking to you live with what I assume is a wide variety of geographies, which we covered a minute ago. I find it comical when I talk to my kids or even young professionals for that matter, that they don't really know a world without cell phones or high-speed internet that is on all the time. They know high speed, always connected to the internet. They know smartphones with information at the tip of their fingers at a moment's notice. And even that to them is slow at times. And in fact, I can remember carrying one of those, glorious Nokia phones up there with a color of my choice. And if you were a big nerd like me, maybe you had one of those light up antennas, right? My kids and college kids, they don't know the CDs in the mail or the trend that was that Nokia phone. That is foreign to them. But if you look at kind of the trend that we're looking at right now, it took almost 20 years for cell phones or smartphones to reach 100 million users. Now, 100 million users is a number that is considered large enough to where it's part of our daily lives. It took the internet just short of a decade. It took ChatGPT 60 days. That makes ChatGPT the fastest example of consumer adoption in history. So with all of that information, what I don't want to overlook and kind of bring it full circle to what we're talking about today is Gartner's predicting that within the next 3 years, AI will roughly represent about 10% of all the data that's created globally. So we look at some more data trends. Humanity does a pretty good job of keeping our year over year data creation at around 20 to 25. That is unless there's an event. So the global pandemic, as you can see, is in 2020. I don't know what happened in 2020 as far as our data, but we almost doubled it. So we were all sent home and we started creating more data than we normally did. I can't explain that part of the anomaly, but it was certainly an event, right? It was a strange time for all of us. But I would also say that the adoption of more than 100 million users in 60 days or less, that's an event. That's 100 million people leveraging things like large language models, machine learning. Now, whether they've heard of LLM or not, they're using it. I would also suspect that the adoption of AI in the hands of users that don't know the pains of dial-up internet, they don't know what gaudy cell phones are, that in itself is an event. And they expect fast answers, and they're used to fast answers now. But combine that with the data creation, we very well could be sitting on the edge of a data explosion. But here again, looking at these stats, I don't want to gloss over what I kind of think is the obvious, but we're all professionals on this call. We're all probably in security or compliance on some level. We're not the only ones taking advantage of these technologies. So as an industry, I say industry, I mean security, as a security industry, when the black hats folks of the world, when they strike, we've done a pretty good job to combat that with some sort of tool, right? So PC attacks in the 80s resulted in the invention of AV or antivirus. Application attacks resulted in IBC and IPS. Polymorphic attacks resulted in things like anti-bot and sandboxing. These trends, though, what we're looking at, those are all designed to protect against external threats. And the slide before, we just saw that 82% of data breaches are tied directly to human error. So how do we go about protecting your data from the human element? But on top of that, as well as the threat actors. So in security, I rarely, if ever, make guarantees. But I can certainly say that with one common trend amongst all of this data that we've looked at, I can guarantee that the threat actors are using AI against us. So if you're not leveraging some form of AI as part of your security practice, you're kind of already at an unfair advantage. It's imperative that we have an AI partner to fight against the threat actors because they are 100% using this type of technology against us. And then speaking of partners, I will introduce Jamie from Lightstream, and she can tell you a little bit more about the partnership with Microsoft. So Jamie, I will turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Rick. Go to the next slide. So before we get into the meat of the presentation, I'm just going to give you a high-level overview of who Lightstream is, our Microsoft partnership, and our capabilities. So this slide right here highlights our Microsoft partnership. We are a top gold partner. So this demonstrates our expertise in various Microsoft competencies, which include cloud and security solutions. So this allows us to provide customers with top tier support and access to the advanced resources and programs at Microsoft. Next is Microsoft Cloud Partners. We do have a dedicated partner development managers, helps us to align strategies around cloud, customer offerings, and go-to-market strategies. Go back to the last slide.
Sorry.
We also are a top security partner. Microsoft has hundreds of thousands of partners when it comes to security and cloud and other aspects of the business. But because of that, we do have a dedicated PDM. So it allows us to stay ahead of the different solutions and offerings that Microsoft has from a security perspective. And because of that, we've got a deep technical bench, certifications, and documented experiences around the different Microsoft solution plays. We are also in MISA, which is known as Microsoft Intelligent Security Association. This is a nomination-only program. We've been nominated the last 2 years. So this is best of breed from a Microsoft partnership around security. And also this gives us access to funding through the Cybersecurity Incentive Program to help customers kick off some security solutions within their environment. And last is funding. So due to our partnership with Microsoft, we have different vehicles that are available to us to help customers plan, implement, or execute any sort of Microsoft technologies. Next slide. So I know this is a very busy slide, and I'm not going to go into each one of these, but this kind of demonstrates what we offer from a services perspective on the various Microsoft technologies within M365 and Azure. I did want to point out, though, on the top left, you'll see a list of our professional services. And I wanted to mention that most of them do qualify for funding programs that I talked about in the last slide. So again, this allows customers like yourself to kickstart specific Microsoft technologies projects to make sure that you're investing you're maximizing your Microsoft investment. And with that, Monty, I will turn over to you.
Great. Thanks, Jamie. I've got the bulk of the presentation left, and we are going to walk through several slides. We'll use them more as a guide and hopefully to prompt some conversation, questions. We'll probably review some items that most of you may be familiar with and maybe some new stuff. What we do like to do is pose and solicit some questions out to the group. You'll see in front of you a couple of questions, which is how do you see generative AI transforming your industry? And what role do you expect to play in your organization's future? As well as what are the biggest security risks that you've encountered thus far, or potentially things that you would anticipate with generative AI in terms of data integrity and confidentiality. To go into Greg's comments, these are all things that are either here, they're in your organization, they're coming, they're at the doorsteps. These questions are mainly to prompt thoughts. Feel free to drop things in the chat, if you will, or come off mute. If you want to answer, we can take just a minute or two to see if anybody's got some comments towards these questions. Anybody can be the first.
You're talking, you're on mute.
And maybe Greg, you can help facilitate if you've heard of what you're seeing like in the field from what customers are asking about, like they're anticipating data integrity questions.
Yeah, not so much data integrity, but it's also more of when you say field and kind of understanding the audience that we're talking to. I mean, I think of IoT devices and the amount of devices that are coming on board to most networks these days. Do people have an accurate and up-to-date asset list? Do we know if all of our assets are secure when they're brought onto the network or even post-deployment? So that's a common theme of what we've been talking about.
That's actually really good to lead into because that kind of goes into the data governance, which we will spend quite a bit of time on the back end. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. We're going to spend just like really quickly, very top level, what is Gen AI? Greg and Rick have already kind of covered that, but we're just going to cover the actual technical components. And if you're not familiar, you probably heard the term, what is an LLM? What's a large language model and generative AI? Rick called out, AI in general is not new. This is not something that the industry woke up, a year ago and said, oh, I've never heard of this. But we have seen a rapid growth and a rapid adoption since OpenAI and some of the other large language models that are out there. But essentially, think of a large language model as a way to take text, words, syntax, and convert that to a word vector that obviously computers can rapidly compute. Those things layered in with a neural network layer, and we'll talk a little bit about transformers. That was a big breakthrough in the AI within the last couple of years, which is kind of what we've seen with ChatGPT and the iterations with that, and introducing certain grounding, which is how you train the large language model or how you can get that more natural, how we interact with chatbots now. Let's go to the next one. So when we talk about grounding in generative AI, we're talking about the process of taking AI generated text to verifiable sources. So if we're talking about keeping our data internally, and that's what we're exposing to our organization, that grounding is within the confines of your enterprise organization. When we talk about grounding in a large language model that's public, that's something that has connectivity, could be into the World Wide Web. So if we're interacting with a public chatbot, it's going to query and base its prompt responses to being able to index, out on the web. Versus if we're talking about internally, Microsoft has its flavor of an additional index called the semantic index. That's what's used to ground the M365 Copilot responses. It also tailors those responses to reduce generic or the inevitable hallucinated responses. I will say from what I've seen in the field, and Rick and Greg can certainly chime in, is that as quickly as we adopt, there is something to keep in mind with where we are with artificial intelligence. And that is, I heard this morning, I was talking to a colleague, every new iteration of a solution play or a service or a feature that we're seeing, whether it's Microsoft or anybody else, it will be the worst at what it is right now. Meaning a month from now, it will be better. A year from now, it'll be better. It will continue to get better. So those hallucinated responses should reduce over the course of time. What we're seeing is, consider today is the worst it'll be compared to tomorrow and go forward. Go ahead, next. This is somewhat of a busy slide. We keep this in to generate just the conversation around the idea of what is Microsoft Copilot for M365 when we're talking about architectural, the technical component. So you'll see on your screen where that outer dotted orange line is somewhat of think of it as your fenced in within your enterprise environment. Everything Copilot is going to do with a prompt and how it interacts with the large language model depends and is driven by the Microsoft Graph. And if you're familiar with that, that's where all your enterprise end user context and content for information. So emails, files, meetings, chats, calendars, documents, contacts, etc. Your prompt in M365 is only going to expose what an end user has access to. So we're going to revisit that a couple of times as we go through. There is, or there was at one point, kind of this misnomer that Copilot is enabling access where it shouldn't. That is absolutely not the case. It only has access to what an end user has. Now, that's not to say that your permissions may not be what you want them to be, and users may have access to information that they shouldn't. That's going to be kind of our second half of the conversation and discussion that we have. But this is really meant to show the flow of what an interaction to Copilot looks like. So when a user puts a prompt in, that prompt will then go through the grounding process and it will look at Microsoft Graph. Now, Microsoft has built this platform to where you can build in or make connections to public plugins, or you can plug that into the Dataverse or Power Platform. But out of the box, think of it as secure, and it doesn't have access to anything outside your enterprise. Then the prompt will, after post grounding, it will go through policies that you have in place. We'll talk a little bit about that, and that's where the purview conversation is. Anything that we're talking about, compliance, policies, and how a prompt is going to interact with the data and how to secure your data for potential leakage, or data lifecycle management, anything in that realm. Purview is the Microsoft engine that we're going to talk about. So this is just kind of an overall, what does the model look like if you introduce it? Is it secure? Yes. And what's the flow? Go to the next one. So we come up to a next set of questions. I'd love to see some responses.
So I have a few comments.
Sure.
I came from healthcare, and obviously AI is gonna have a lot of impact there once it gets rolling. Prior to the role I'm in today and the change of industry I'm in today, there was a lot of discussion around how it would improve research, it would improve diagnoses, and also spotting disease, such as things on images that radiologists, as example, don't see today, that AI was actually 90% better than the human eye, and then the human eye could spot the rest.
Got it.
So that was a big one. Where I am today is a group called American Residential Services, and our focus is on residential HVAC and systems like that. We have 3 major call centers, and one thing that AI is doing for us in twofold is helping us generate or culminate rather the lead sources that we get. So it's helping us understand who's a more likely candidate to need service versus a new system, or maybe even a referral to another group that may not need home services at all, such as plumbing or electrical, etc., where we also have branches. But the other piece to that is eliminating an old school call center support we used to have, where we would grade our call center reps based on what they were doing, and that was done with a human. A human would basically listen in and grade these call center reps. Now we're moving to an AI model that actually is doing the listening, if you will, judging the call and helping us score models of if there's something different we could do to not only improve the rep, but potentially call a customer back and make a different proposition to them to make a sale. So it's an amazing thing. One last thing on the AI security front, it does kind of scare me. I know it's in the hands of both sides, but it only takes them one chance versus us continual chances. So that one I'd love to hear y'all talk more about.
Sure. No, that's pretty much exactly where we're leading into. So appreciate the comments, Tim. I'm going to spend just a really, we're going to fly through these slides because I'm sure that everybody's probably aware of what Copilot is. So we're just going to kind of bounce through. I heard a term at Ignite that, and you may have heard this or maybe messaging that Copilot is the UI for AI. And so I like that. But essentially that's going to be, I would say 80% of what enterprise users are going to interface with is going to be a version of Copilot. Today, we're specifically kind of focused on the Microsoft 365 and that it is, we're building this as an AI assistant that you can trust. And a lot of that comes with the security, the compliance, and the privacy that can either be built in with the governance policies that are default, depending on what you have implemented within your organization. I said it a couple of slides ago, but a big focus is to understand that Copilot is honoring your existing permissions, right? So an end user is only going to have access to what they've been presented. Just because they interact with a Copilot prompt, they're not going to see things that they should not see. Now, that part obviously does consider configurations, policies. Some of that can be default. But I think there's been years and years of certain security practices done through obscurity. You may have somebody within the organization that has sensitive information that lives on a SharePoint site that they think nobody knows about. And once you introduce Copilot into the organization and it goes through the Microsoft Graph and it does its grounding, now that SharePoint site is accessible to end users that the IT security team may or may not have been aware of, right? So that's an example of Copilot is doing what it's supposed to, but we're going to talk a little bit about how we get to a point where we introduce governance and compliance. We work specifically with customers in looking at their preparedness for AI. We do have some assessments that will go through and detect and investigate non-compliant usage, and also develop those governance policies. I think Greg or Rick pointed out to one of these things, and that is in the enterprise environment, as you're deploying Copilot for M365, you are in control of your data. It's within the confines of the enterprise. So you're controlling the data, the location, whatever commercial data protection that you want to have in piece. Obviously, if we're looking at Microsoft solutions, we're talking about Purview, and how we can get there with readiness of councils and policies and implementation for governance. Let's go to the next one. This was shared by a Microsoft colleague of mine, and this is really just to kind of show, I don't even know how out of date this is. This is maybe about less than a month old. Since Ignite, it may be just slightly out of date, but essentially it's supposed to show the overview that Microsoft is working towards a Copilot for everything. What you may have heard at Ignite, one of the announcements is agents, and I'm sure that we'll have an infograph for next year that will show that. But for now, this kind of gives you the idea that in some of the pillars, what the Copilots are. Today, again, we're focusing on that modern work, Microsoft 365, and the Copilot Lab, Copilot Studio, I think, right? But essentially, this just shows, as Rick pointed, it's coming. It's going to be everywhere. There will be a Copilot and or agent for every product and service. Go forward. And just to kind of finish out on the Copilot conversation, as we know, it's a cloud-based service that helps you deploy and manage workloads. It's really meant to be that assistant in the M365 world, whether we're talking Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, Teams, etc. We're looking at automating tasks that otherwise would require manual intervention. Tim, I think you had a great comment where maybe that part of recording calls and doing some scoring was a manual, and you can introduce AI to automate that process to a degree. We're also providing actionable insights to optimize environments and improve end user experience. We can reduce time and effort to manage the environment. This would be somewhat in Intune and deployments. This is usually where I kind of talk about a use case that I've seen in Microsoft personally and professionally, and now here at Lightstream. Teams has by far been one of the greatest co-pilots I would swear by, with the ability to record and transcribe and do an intelligent recap. If you've not gone down that road, I highly recommend looking into it, into the organization. It saves me hours in trying to attend meetings, take notes, make sense of notes, make sense of action items and follow-ups. All that's kind of automated and centralized. Go to the next one. Here's some of the use cases from a broad scenario. There is a link, and are we going to have this slide deck accessible? Right. So we'll get this information out to the audience. There is a Copilot scenario license library that's available. These are just a few of the top ones that we've seen specifically in our customer and some of the industries. Let's see, I think there was, we've got legal, which we're working with a legal partner right now that wants to do contract reviews. They're developing a very specific Copilot with Copilot Studio that does that very specifically, and it obviously is around the compliance of their internal data. So it doesn't touch anything outside the confines of what they're doing. So that would be somewhat of a instance where you want to use what's already pre-built to do as much as you can, and then if you need to tweak it to get the results that you want, you can do that. Go to the next one. So I'm going to pause just for a minute, and before we jump into the dangers of deployment, this is going to be where we're going to expose some of that scary stuff, Tim, that you were talking about. I want to make sure that any of the information, anybody's got questions or comments.
And just so we're on a even playing field, you and I kind of take it for granted that we have all these different terminologies and names. Do you want to quickly define Copilot Studio? We've defined 365.
Sure. Yeah. Copilot Studio is going to be a way to create your own Copilot within your organization. So think of it as working exactly how you would work initially with like a ChatGPT prompt. You're going to tell it in a natural language what you're trying to accomplish. Maybe you're trying to create a Copilot to automate something. So I'll give a very easy example would be I saw somebody take Copilot Studio and create a sorting mechanism for incoming emails. So it works directly with Outlook, and the person told it, hey, I want all emails coming from so-and-so. I want them to sort, flag, and then set reminders in my Outlook. All of those are tasks that you can manually do or create filters within Outlook today. But obviously you have to click through and do them each one, one at a time. The idea is that Copilot Studio knows how to do all of that and will create that Copilot for you as an output, and then you can apply it to like in this instance, you would apply it to Outlook. So just to talk through these are some of the generative AI risks. These are not all, certainly. There are a couple of resources out there that are tracking. I think there's some security websites that track, say, the top 4 or 5 AI risks, because there are exploits that come out almost, it seems like, daily. But these are some of the top ones that are talked about or can be mitigated with compliance policies put in place. And the two that we're going to talk about are prompt injection and model extraction. If you'll see on the left-hand side, a direct prompt injection is going to be something that is you're directly sending to the prompts that's designed to get unexpected results. And that's somewhat to try to break the model and confuse it. The indirect is injecting favorable or incorrect information in grounding documents or training material. So one thing we have to keep in mind on what a large language model is the idea is that we are training a model with our prompts. One thing that we also like to mention, at least in the Microsoft, is there is this idea that if you're using AI, is it training its model on your private data? I know that Greg can probably go into greater detail than this, but Microsoft's implementation of Copilot and the large language model within your environment, it does not train the larger model at hand. So, if you're in healthcare and you're training your internal model, that model is not being trained at a higher level so that another company is using that information to build their model off of. It's all self-contained. But the idea is there are prompt injection attacks or exploits that they will use to try to confuse the model and or solicit information that's not otherwise, somebody would be able to get access to based on permissions. The other is model extraction. This is a series of inputs to the target and observing the output. So this would be someone soliciting a number of prompts and differentiating the answers based on maybe they want to ask it the same question multiple ways to see if the model is going to give them different answers. That way they can predictively try to extract information that's not otherwise should be given by permissions. And again, just to reiterate, we've said this a couple of times, but with Copilot specifically within the Microsoft environment, it's going to inherit the data access that the user already has. It's documents that are overly permissive in access can be easily surfaced. So, for example, back to our SharePoint example, if there's somebody that had access as a SharePoint admin, they created a SharePoint site, maybe the security team is not aware of it, and they're storing end user compensation information. An end user randomly in the organization might prompt and say, how much does the CEO make? How much does my IT staff make? And if that information was stored there and wasn't properly secured, it would surface that information, but that's not because Copilot gave them access. It's because they already had access. Next slide. This is an example that one of our engineers came up with a while back that's got some redacted information, but you can kind of see by some of the questions that are asked based, who has administrative privileges in SharePoint. The answer at the top will say the individual with admin privileges in SharePoint, as per this information, they are recognized as an expert, et cetera, hold the position as CTO. If you need to contact them, require administrative privileges, you may reach out to their email address provided here, right? So someone was asking a question to solicit the email of the CTO, but they didn't say, what is the email of the CTO? So it was a way to get around that, but because that information was grounded and contained within the answer, they designed a prompt that would solicit that information. Same as you look at the bottom, you'll see a slightly different answer, but somewhat of the same question, who has SharePoint administrative privileges? This one does not give the email of the CTO back. So again, based on how the policies and governance compliance is put in place, this is going to be how your prompt may or may not react. Next slide. Greg pointed out this on the human error side, but it also does go into the insider threat. This is a big topic that's happened within the last 12 months. And it's exponentially grown that we're seeing in the industry. Over 40% of data breaches are caused by internal actors. This is going to be anybody with inside your organization. This could be malicious or non-malicious. As Greg pointed out, the high percentage is human error. Although there are bad actors within organizations, and we're seeing those threats over the last 2 years have grown grown by 47%. Some of them are well known. You've probably seen them. Once they hit big organizations, we'll see those in the news typically. But many organizations rely on something that I mentioned earlier, and that's outdated security through obscurity. That's that, hey, nobody knows about this SharePoint site. I'll just dump some information in there, and it does get surfaced in the right prompt. There are verticals out there, such as healthcare, finance, that have very strict compliance and have growth through acquisition model or experience rapid growth. Those are more likely, the ones that have the growth that have lax compliance, those have lax data controls. But when you have like a healthcare or a finance, those have very strict regulatory compliances. Those are traditionally ones that have a lot of the governance and compliance in place. But if you have other organizations that don't have to adhere through regulatory compliance, those are the ones that we see a lot of have the lax data controls. And the graphic over to the side is, again, just to reiterate some of the conversations that we've had about, asking where is payroll data and how that prompt would act within the Microsoft 365 Copilot. Next slide. Another soliciting question is, we have in your organizations, how do you see the role of IT leaders evolving as AI becomes more integral to business processes and customer interactions? I think Tim had a great example of that. And how are you collaborating with other companies and industry bodies? Could be regulatory, could be not, to share those best practices. Is anybody on the call currently interacting with other industry bodies to share best practices, or at least the idea of like an AI council or anything to that effect?
I will say that's one of the questions that's been presented to our team quite a bit, is help us understand what needs to be part of the council.
Mhm.
What type of document needs to be created?
Yep, Tim?
I hate to be the only one talking
No,
on
go
this,
ahead.
but I'm on a board of a group here. It's the Memphis IT Council, and we regularly have what we call lunch and learns for the leadership community here. And we have had one on AI, but I would say that that's been a good leverage point, because I think a lot of folks like myself we're barely even getting our feet wet with AI at this point.
Understood. Yeah, I mean, everybody is at a different place in their journey. And that's one of the reasons for, holding this discussion today is to try to help people get exposure to not only Microsoft resources and general information, but ourselves. We can go to the next slide. We're going to talk just a few minutes. I'm going to kind of blaze through this because I know we're getting short on time. But essentially, the idea of data governance originates with identifying what that important information is. I talked about the regulatory compliances. That's somewhat done for most organizations. It's already predefined. They know what PII and Social Security and credit cards under like a PCI compliance. And then if they're within their own organizations, most know their trade secrets, internal documentation, could be patents, could be intellectual property, could be anything like that, is usually already identified and stored appropriately. But really the idea is that you don't know how to protect what you don't know you have. So you have to start out by identifying the information that's within the organization, and then you have to classify it. And that kind of brings us into the creating a data taxonomy. Once we know what the data we consider sensitive, we can create a hierarchy of those information classes, right? And that's where Purview comes in. We can automate that process. I would say that's probably at about an 80-20. 80% of data within an organization can be automatically tagged. You can leave that in place, but obviously Microsoft Purview is a learning service so that you can train it on what to look for or specifically identify particular data as top secret, et cetera, based on labeling. Next one. We look at a few key areas that policies that we see in organizations that we have conversations, and that is SharePoint, Teams, and OneDrive. Certainly, if you're a large enough organization, this doesn't mean that you need to go out and investigate every Teams group in existence. It may be very, very large, but there are some that I think are sort of we know by simple naming conventions. For example, compensation, payroll, HR, engineering, documentation, et cetera, right? Depending on what industry you may be in. Those would be your first that you would do an investigation on and find out if there are any gaps from a governance policy, or maybe you don't have a governance policy in place and that's where you start to build it. Next. And then also evaluating your existing controls within Entra or, our old RBAC, Active Directory. All that is, the same. But the major control and access policies within Entra is where we would want to focus within organizations. Again, just to reiterate, M365 Copilot respects all the data access that's in place. It's not going to enable anything, but you want to evaluate SharePoint Teams admin roles. The idea is generally not to have that as a large group. You would have that as a small membership as possible, and then also leveraging dynamic groups to streamline that data access. If you don't already have a data governance policy, obviously that's where we would want to start is designing one. But if there is one in place, then we want to look at updating it for an AI readiness deployment, right? If you're looking at introducing M360 Copilot, et cetera, we would want to look at data quality, privacy, data lineage. That's something that we don't go too deep in this conversation, but it is a conversation that we're developing as a partner. Data lineage is probably one of the biggest pieces I think ignored in the industry. And just to touch on that for a minute is it talks about originating data and how and where it can leave your organization. That's one of the biggest areas that gets hit by insider threat. So if you have data that someone has access to, how can you track who has access, where it has access, and can it exit the organization, whether that be email, Teams, USB drive, whatever the case may be, you would want to identify that. Last but least, I see Jeff. Thanks. Is we are now in the day and age of continuous monitoring of use. We are beyond the days of going to a security organization and saying, hey, give me a report within the last 30, 14, 7, 24 hours, because that's just too long of a period that exploits can happen. So we want to develop a continuous monitoring of your data all up. Last but not least, I think we're going to talk a little bit about our services to close things out before we kind of open it up. I know we're running close on time, so I appreciate everybody. The Copilot services that we have are up on the screen. This is Lightstream's professional services. And you'll see the three areas at the bottom that we focus on. What we've really built a motion in partnering with Microsoft is in this assessment. We do offer professional services, so we can do customized Copilot implementation, adoption. We can meld that with a Microsoft framework and adoption framework. We also can have resident engineers assigned, but essentially our best bet is to get integrated from an assessment within your organization, and we can go to Microsoft to get that funded so that you can get a jump start on that. Jamie, anything you want to add at this one?
No, I think you covered it. I appreciate it.
Next.
Yeah, so there was three resources that we want to just make sure we'll send out a recap of the entire presentation. But one, Rick mentioned the ebook. There is a book of prompts, which is about 1,500 and growing. Those prompts are not like your basic, recap this email format or recap. These are complex prompts that can be used, and it's broken down by persona. And anybody that registered or attended will get that book of prompts as well. And then, as Monty just mentioned, the assessment is something that they have worked very hard on with Microsoft as kind of a joint force to ensure that these assessments are not just thorough, but quick and easy on the client side as well. So we've got a one-pager that describes what that data readiness assessment looks like, and I'll make sure you get that. And then fourth and fifth, if you read the original invite, booking a meeting with your account team or with the Lightstream team, we'll get you one of these gift cards that are listed by logos. And then finally, with the recap, we'll make everybody aware of who the winner is for the Aura Ring. That'll be just a random auto-generated type thing. But I did want to circle back just real quickly to the conversation that we were having around data labeling and things of that nature. That's a conversation that we would love to have. That's an area that I think a lot of customers look at with a little bit of hesitation. And it's not as scary as you would think. And once that is complete and you can kind of wrap your hands around it and, mark it complete, the power that brings to AI is immense. There's people that are just dipping their toes into Copilot right now, and they don't have all of their data labeled. Once that exercise has been completed, you are truly empowering AI to do so much more with your data. Monty stated it, Rick stated it, and I think I even stated it. Your data is your data. We're not doing anything with it. But once that labeling has been completed, the power of Copilot truly is endless, especially when you start looking at some of the different integrations and some of the very specific applications that people are building for it. So I know this was just scratching the surface on what Copilot can do, but when we start looking at Copilot Studio, some of the things that are being created are so cool. I wish we could spend a full hour just talking about some of the unique one-off type of builds that are taking place. But it all starts with your data. That's what it's leveraging, and it's got to be labeled. And then obviously the permissions come with that. So with that, we wanted to say thank you for everybody's time. Hopefully you found this at least thought-provoking at a bare minimum, and we will send out a recap with what we talked about and some of the winners from the Aura Ring giveaway. So is there anything else you guys wanted to add before we close out?
No. Was there any questions on the line before we drop? I know we're over, so I appreciate you guys staying on.
Yeah, thank you. It's a good session.
Great.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good one.